What if I told you that 20 of the most powerful healing and flavoring plants on Earth are sitting in your backyard right now, considered weeds pulled out by the handful, composted, or poisoned with herbicide? What if I told you that these plants require almost no care, reseed themselves year after year, outperform grocery store produce in nutrient density, and have been used for centuries to treat wounds, calm a mind, fight infection, and build immune resilience? And what if I told you that the reason you've never heard of most of them has nothing to do with science and everything to do with control? Today, we're walking through 20 overlooked, underestimated, and in some cases actively suppressed herbs that heal, flavor food, and grow themselves. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these plants matter, how to grow them, and why they represent a quiet rebellion against dependency. Let's begin. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel exists to expose plants that make people independent. Plants that don't need corporations, fertilizer companies, or pharmacy middlemen. Plants that grow in spite of neglect, spread without permission, and nourish without asking for anything in return. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe now. This isn't a hobby. This is a movement toward resilience. Let's start with the first plant on the list, and one of the most misunderstood ground covers in the world. Purslane, Portulaca oleracea, a succulent weed that grows in cracks, sidewalks, driveways, and garden beds across every continent except Antarctica. It's been called invasive. It's been sprayed. It's been dismissed as a nuisance. And yet purslane contains more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy green on the planet. Gram for gram, it has more alpha-linolenic acid than fish oil supplements. It's loaded with vitamin A, vitamin C, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. It contains betalan antioxidants, which fight inflammation and oxidative stress at the cellular level. 1 cup of purslane has the omega-3 content of a serving of salmon. Let that sink in. It tastes lemony, slightly salty, and crunchy. You can eat it raw in salads, saute it like spinach, or pickle it. It self-seeds everywhere. Once it's in your garden, it comes back every year without replanting. It thrives in heat, tolerates poor soil, and requires no fertilizer. So why is it pulled and poisoned? Because it grows for free. Because it spreads without permission. Because it doesn't fit into the controlled agricultural model that depends on annual seeds, chemical inputs, and consumer dependency. Purslane is food independence in plant form, and it's been hiding in plain sight. Lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, a perennial herb in the mint family with a citrus aroma that's been used since ancient Greece to calm the nervous system, improve sleep, and support cognitive function. Lemon balm contains rosmarinic acid, a compound that has been shown in peer-reviewed studies to reduce anxiety, improve mood, and enhance memory. It's been used traditionally to treat insomnia, digestive upset, and viral infections, including cold sores caused by herpes simplex virus. It spreads fast. Once established, it fills in garden beds, self-seeds aggressively, and returns every spring without replanting. It tolerates shade, poor soil, and irregular watering. You can harvest it continuously from spring through fall. It's also almost entirely absent from grocery stores. Why? Because it's too easy to grow. Because it doesn't transport well. Because it can't be commodified in the same way basil or parsley can. Lemon balm is a perfect example of a plant that's been left out of the food system, not because it lacks value, but because it offers too much value for too little cost. Sorrel, Rumex acetosa, a perennial leafy green with a sharp, tangy flavor caused by high levels of oxalic acid and vitamin C. Sorrel contains more vitamin C than oranges. It's rich in iron, magnesium, and potassium. It's been used traditionally to support liver function, reduce inflammation, and improve digestion. It grows in temperate climates with almost no care. It comes back every year, produces multiple harvests per season, and tolerates partial shade and poor soil. You plant it once, and it feeds you for a decade. It's rarely sold commercially because it wilts quickly after harvest. It doesn't fit the supply chain, so it's been quietly removed from the public consciousness. even though it was once a staple green in European kitchens. Sorrel is what happens when a plant is too functional, too resilient, and too independent to be profitable. Chives. Allium schenoprasum. A perennial onion relative that comes back every spring, requires zero maintenance. It contains immune-boosting sulfur compounds similar to those found in garlic. Chives are rich in vitamin K, vitamin C, and folate. They contain allicin, a compound with antibacterial and antiviral properties. They support cardiovascular health, reduce inflammation, and improve digestion. They grow in clumps, spread slowly, and tolerate cold, heat, drought, and neglect. You can harvest them continuously from early spring through late fall. They're one of the first plants to emerge after winter, and yet they're treated as a garnish, a decoration, an afterthought. Why? Because they're too easy, because they don't require replanting, because they don't fit the model of annual dependence that drives the seed and agriculture industry. Chives are resilience, and resilience doesn't sell. Garlic chives. Allium tuberosum. A close relative of chives with flat leaves, white flowers, and a stronger garlic flavor. Garlic chives contain the same antibacterial and antiviral compounds as garlic, including allicin and sulfur-based phytochemicals. They've been used in traditional Chinese medicine to improve digestion, support kidney function, and reduce blood pressure. They self-seed aggressively. Once established, they return every year, spread into new areas, and require no fertilizer or irrigation. They tolerate poor soil, full sun, and partial shade. They're also almost entirely absent from Western grocery stores, despite being a staple in Asian cuisine. Why? Because they grow too easily. Because they spread without control. Because they represent a plant that doesn't need management, oversight, or industry support. Garlic chives are autonomy in seed form. Lovage. Levisticum officinale. A tall, celery-flavored perennial that's been used since Roman times as a digestive aid, diuretic, and respiratory tonic. Lovage contains volatile oils, including ligustolide, which have been shown to relax smooth muscle tissue, reduce gas and bloating, and support kidney function. It's rich in vitamin C, quercetin, and other anti-inflammatory compounds. It's a long-lived perennial. Once planted, it can survive for decades. It grows up to 6 feet tall, produces abundant foliage, and requires almost no care. It tolerates cold, heat, and poor soil. It's also nearly impossible to find in stores. Why? Because it's too productive. Because it doesn't fit into the annual crop model. Because it's a plant that, once established, doesn't need to be replanted, reseeded, or repurchased. Lovage is what food security looks like when it's not tied to commerce. Self-heal. Prunella vulgaris. A low-growing perennial ground cover that's been used for centuries in Europe and Asia to treat wounds, sore throats, and inflammation. Self-heal contains rosmarinic acid, ursolic acid, and tannins with documented antibacterial, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory properties. It's been studied for its ability to speed wound healing, reduce tumor growth, and modulate immune response. It spreads naturally as a ground cover. It tolerates shade, poor soil, and foot traffic. It self-seeds and comes back every year. It requires no fertilizer, no irrigation, and no maintenance. And it's classified as a weed. Why? Because it grows where it's not planted. Because it spreads without permission. Because it represents a plant that doesn't need human intervention to survive. Self-heal is a perfect metaphor for what we've lost. Plants that heal, spread, and support human health without asking for anything in return. Mint. Mentha spicata. Spearmint. The most unstoppable herb on this list. Mint contains menthol, rosmarinic acid, and flavonoids that support digestion, reduce nausea, and relieve respiratory congestion. It's been used traditionally to treat irritable bowel syndrome, headaches, and inflammation. It spreads aggressively through underground runners. Once planted, it's almost impossible to remove. It tolerates shade, poor soil, and neglect. It comes back every spring with more vigor than the year before. And yet it's rarely discussed as a food security crop. Why? Because it's too easy. Because it can't be controlled. Because it represents a plant that doesn't need management and doesn't fit into the industrial model of scarcity and control. Mint is abundance, and abundance threatens dependency. Oregano, Origanum vulgar, Greek oregano, wild oregano, a perennial herb with antimicrobial properties so strong it's been studied as a natural preservative and antibiotic alternative. Oregano contains carvacrol and thymol, two phenolic compounds with documented antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral activity. It's been shown to inhibit the growth of E. coli, Salmonella, and Staphylococcus aureus. It's drought-tolerant, perennial, and spreads slowly through root division. It requires no fertilizer, tolerates poor soil, and thrives in heat. You plant it once, and it produces for years. It's also one of the few herbs that's more potent when dried. And yet it's sold in tiny bottles for inflated prices, despite being one of the easiest herbs to grow. Why? Because growing your own oregano means you stop buying it. And stopping buying means independence. Thyme, Thymus vulgaris. A low-growing perennial with respiratory support properties that have been documented in traditional and clinical settings for centuries. Thyme contains thymol, a compound with expectorant, antibacterial, and antifungal properties. It's been used to treat coughs, bronchitis, and sore throats. It's also rich in vitamin C, vitamin A, and iron. It's drought-tolerant, perennial, and requires almost no care. It tolerates poor soil, full sun, and cold winters. It spreads slowly and can be harvested year-round in mild climates. And yet it's sold in small quantities, treated as a specialty herb, and priced as if it's rare. Thyme is common. Thyme is easy. Thyme is resilient. And that's exactly why it's not promoted. Fennel, Feniculum vulgar, wild fennel, a tall, feathery perennial with a licorice flavor and a long history of use as a digestive aid. Fennel contains anethole, a compound that relaxes the digestive tract, reduces gas and bloating, and stimulates appetite. It's been used traditionally to support lactation, reduce menstrual cramps, and calm colic in infants. It self-seeds aggressively. In some regions, it's considered invasive. It tolerates drought, poor soil, and neglect. Once established, it returns year after year without replanting. And it's been restricted in some areas. Why? Because it spreads without permission. Because it doesn't fit into managed landscapes. Because it represents a plant that grows on its own terms. Anise hyssop, Agastache feniculum, a North American native with a sweet, minty flavor and immune-supporting properties. Anise hyssop has been used traditionally to treat colds, flu, and respiratory infections. It's rich in antioxidants and has been studied for its antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects. It reseeds easily. It tolerates drought, poor soil, and cold winters. It attracts pollinators and produces abundant foliage and flowers. It's also almost entirely absent from mainstream gardening culture, despite being native, resilient, and productive. Why? Because it doesn't need support. Because it thrives without intervention. Because it's a plant that makes people independent. Cilantro, Eryngium foetidum, sawtooth coriander, a tropical herb with a flavor 10 times stronger than cilantro. Cilantro has been used traditionally in Caribbean and Southeast Asian medicine to reduce inflammation, treat infections, and support digestion. It's rich in calcium, iron, and vitamins A and C. It self-seeds in warm climates. It tolerates heat, humidity, and poor soil. It produces continuously in tropical and subtropical regions. And it's almost unknown in temperate regions, despite being one of the most flavorful and medicinally active herbs in the world. Why? Because it doesn't fit the temperate agricultural model. Because it's too productive in the wrong climate. Because it represents a plant that thrives outside the control zones of industrial agriculture. Episode, Dysphania ambrosiioides, a pungent, resinous herb used in Mexican cuisine to reduce gas and bloating caused by beans. Epizote contains iscaridole, a compound with antiparasitic and digestive properties. It's been used traditionally to treat intestinal worms, indigestion, and respiratory infections. It's a prolific self-seeder. Once established, it returns every year, spreads aggressively, and requires no care. It tolerates heat, drought, and poor soil. And it's classified as a weed in some regions. Why? Because it grows without permission. Because it spreads without control. Because it represents a plant that doesn't need management. Borage, Borrego officinalis, a fast-growing annual with blue star-shaped flowers and cucumber flavor. Borage is rich in gamma-linolenic acid, an omega-6 fatty acid with anti-inflammatory properties. It's been used traditionally to support skin health, reduce arthritis symptoms, and regulate hormones. It's a heavy self-seeder. Once planted, it returns every year without replanting. It tolerates poor soil and requires no fertilizer. And it's rarely grown commercially. Why? Because it wilts quickly. Because it doesn't transport well. Because it's too easy to grow at home. Good King Henry. Bletum bonus henritus. A perennial leafy green with a spinach-like flavor and a long history of use in Europe. Good King Henry is rich in iron, calcium, and vitamins A and C. It's been used traditionally as a nutritive tonic and digestive aid. It's a hardy perennial. Once planted, it returns every spring for decades. It tolerates cold, poor soil, and shade. And it's almost extinct from cultivation. Why? Because it's too independent. Because it doesn't need replanting. Because it represents a plant that doesn't fit the annual crop model. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, a perennial wildflower with documented wound healing and anti-inflammatory properties. Yarrow contains flavonoids, alkaloids, and sesquiterpene lactones that stop bleeding, reduce inflammation, and support immune function. It's been used for thousands of years to treat wounds, fevers, and digestive issues. It spreads naturally through rhizomes and seeds. It tolerates drought, poor soil, and neglect. It's nearly impossible to kill, and it's classified as a weed in many areas. Why? Because it spreads without permission. Because it grows on its own terms. Because it doesn't need human intervention to survive. Perilla, Perilla frutescens. Shiso, a leafy herb used in Japanese and Korean cuisine with anti-allergy properties. Perilla contains rosmarinic acid and luteolin, compounds that reduce histamine response and support respiratory health. It's been studied for its ability to reduce allergic reactions and inflammation. It reseeds aggressively. Once planted, it returns every year. It tolerates heat, humidity, and poor soil. And it's treated as an invasive species in some regions. Why? Because it spreads without control. Because it doesn't fit into managed landscapes. Because it represents a plant that thrives outside the system. Winter savory, Saccharegium montana, a hardy perennial with a peppery flavor and digestive support properties. Winter savory contains carvacrol and thymol, compounds with antibacterial and antifungal activity. It's been used traditionally to treat indigestion, gas, and respiratory infections. It's drought-tolerant, perennial, and requires almost no care. It tolerates poor soil, cold winters, and heat. And it's almost entirely absent from grocery stores. Why? Because it's too easy to grow. Because it doesn't need replanting. Because it represents a plant that makes people independent. Mexican tarragon, Tagetes lucida, a heat-tolerant perennial with an anise flavor and calming properties. Mexican tarragon has been used traditionally to reduce anxiety, improve sleep, and support digestion. It's rich in antioxidants and essential oils. It self-reseeds in warm climates. It tolerates heat, drought, and poor soil. It produces continuously in frost-free regions. And it's almost unknown outside of Mexico and the southwestern United States. Why? Because it doesn't fit the temperate agricultural model. Because it's too productive in the wrong regions. Because it represents a plant that thrives outside the zones of control. 20 plants. 20 examples of healing, flavor, and resilience that grow themselves, spread without permission, and nourish without asking for anything in return. These plants are not rare. They're not difficult. They're not dangerous. They're overlooked because they make people independent. They're suppressed because they don't fit into systems built on scarcity, control, and annual dependence. But they're still here, growing in sidewalks, spreading through gardens, waiting to be recognized for what they are, tools of resilience. Food prices are rising. Supply chains are fragile. Trust in institutions is eroding. And in the middle of all of that, these plants are still growing, still producing, still offering a quiet path toward independence. If you grow even one of these plants, you've taken a step outside the system. If you share seeds, you've helped someone else do the same. If you teach others, you've created a ripple that moves in the opposite direction of dependency. That's what this channel is about. Not nostalgia, not idealism, action. Leave a comment if you've grown any of these plants. Leave a comment if they're restricted where you live. Leave a comment if you've been told they're weeds, invasive, or dangerous. I want to hear what you've experienced. And if this video resonated with you, subscribe. This is just the beginning. Until next time, grow what makes you independent. Share what makes others resilient. And remember, the most powerful plants are the ones they don't want you to notice.